Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Zelenskyy warns that Russia aims to expand the war beyond Ukraine as he urges more international military support. Iran vows it will never seek nuclear weapons and slams Israel at the UN. And the Duchess of York's spokesperson claims she was trying to protect her daughters when she sent an email apologising to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy told the UN General Assembly that Russia is looking to expand its war beyond Ukraine. He warned that Russian drones are already flying across Europe and called for more military aid to help Kyiv defend itself. Zelenskyy stressed no one can feel safe right now, as he urged international support to stop Moscow's aggression. Here's more of what he had to say.
Yesterday we had a good meeting with President Trump, and I also spoke with many other strong leaders, and together we can change a lot. Yes, much depends on the G7 and G20, but in the end, peace depends on all of us, on the United Nations. So don't stay silent while Russia keeps dragging this war on. Please speak out and condemn it. Please join us in defending life and international law and order. People are waiting for action.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Managing Director of This Is Dubai, Michael Jabri-Pickett, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joins us from Surrey. Michael, let's start with you. We just saw Volodymyr Zelenskyy there addressing the UN General Assembly, a strong message from the Ukrainian president. But what really stood out for you when you were watching that?
What surprised me the most to start off with is that he spoke in English. And I think, and I don't want to sound like a colonialist, but to my ear, it added a little bit of gravitas to his presentation. That he wanted to use a language that certainly the American audience would understand. And I felt like he was trying to direct so much of what was happening to the Americans as well as to Western Europe. And English would be the language that many would understand. But he also said something that, the expression that stood out to me was weapons decide who survive, who survives. And he's talking about we can have wonderful conversations and Donald Trump can make a complete U-turn on his foreign policy when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. But without the backing of that, it is going to fall short. And it harkens back to Mao Zedong, who in 1927 said something very similar, where he said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. And that idea that you have to support your words with real concrete actions, and that's one of the things that he's been trying to get Donald Trump to do for so long, which is to support us with more weapons so that we're in a better position to fight the Russians.
And Isabel, I don't know what you thought of Zelensky's speech and if you agree with a lot of what Michael had to say there.
Yeah, I think not only was he speaking in English, a language that we can understand, but certainly here in Europe, a lot of people will be speaking and understanding the same language when it comes to the threat. He spelled out very, very clearly that Ukraine is simply the first. If Russia isn't stopped now, we will all be affected. And we are, as he was pointing out, beginning to see that happening in real time. The European aviation is under serious threat at the moment. We've had countless incidents in the last week alone Just to list a few, we had those Russian jets into Estonia. We've had issues with drones in Oslo and Copenhagen. We've had a number of critical airports affected by cyber attacks, Heathrow, Berlin, all with links to Russia. And he said the world is simply moving too slowly. And because of this incredible technology, it is actually not even countries with huge and deep pockets that can cause untold harm, but he pointed to North Korea and the capability with drones to cause serious threats. So I think it was a very serious speech that he gave. I think he struck a note that President Trump missed yesterday, even though there were far fewer people gathered to listen to what he had to say. Whereas President Trump used it as an opportunity to pat himself on the back, to pitch himself as a peacekeeper and talk about his own positions. We were reminded quite clearly today from Zelenskyy exactly what the concerns are. And I think something that stood out for me was his point now that actually it was far cheaper to try and stop Putin now than to build critical infrastructure, kindergartens and whatever it might be underground. And he was really just calling really for us to be united.
And what I did find interesting is you spoke about the drones there, Isabel, but almost part of what Zelenskyy was saying in that UN General Assembly speech was he was selling his technology. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. He actually said that we have the technology, we have the experience from the war to shore up fragile relations with foreign partners. He was saying we have this technology. Yes, we have had stringent export rules in place while the war is going on, but we can relax those and we can help you and we can protect your countries, which I thought was really fascinating.
Well, I think, the Ukrainians have had 3.5 years of, I wouldn't say being on their own, but they've had to figure out a way to make this work. And I don't believe that there would have been too many people who would have said this war would have gone on for 3.5 years. It also reminded me a little bit of Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, just the other day, where he talked about, as the international community was coming together to recognize Palestinian statehood, he was saying this is not something that we're comfortable with. We're comfortable sort of turning inward and being more self-sufficient. And that's something that the Ukrainians have had to do. And now the president is saying we've been so self-sufficient. We struck deep into Russia with the drone attack several months ago. We are prepared to start opening up for business so that, what's really interesting right now is that you have fighter jets which cost millions of dollars, but drones will cost thousands of dollars, and they can be almost as effective as a fighter jet could be.
And I think a lot of people have said this, Isabel, about the war in Ukraine. We don't need tanks anymore. The drone technology is really so far ahead and way more effective in many ways. But let's just touch a little bit, Isabel, on Donald Trump, because he seemed to have this massive shift yesterday after meeting Zelenskyy on the sidelines of the UN, and it surprised many people.
Yes, well, I mean, that's the nature of President Trump, isn't it? And, you can't rely on that support, whereas you could sense that President Zelenskyy was buoyed by the support this time that he received from his trip to to the United States. It wasn't the case last time he was there. And of course, he will be very cautious about accepting that support. And, President Trump suggesting that we should be shooting Russian aircraft out of the sky if they inflict, come into NATO territory was also quite a surprise to military experts as well. And of course, the consequences of that would be, many people would suggest, World War III. So we need to take it with a pinch of salt. That being said, we've had the incident with the Spanish aircraft. The defense secretary or defense minister was flying to Lithuania and their aircraft was interfered with. GPS encryption protected it from being damaged, but the Russians are being held in suspicion. The aircraft was flying near to Russian territory in Kaliningrad, which was on the way to Lithuania. So, Putin is acting with impunity. He is at the moment doing whatever he pleases. And, Zelenskyy just really wanted to make that point. And I think he did make it, that we're all moving too slowly and we need to come together. President Trump making this big U-turn, but, will that last? Will that loyalty remain? It's hard to say.
But also, Michael, he criticised Russia. He did say that they were a paper tiger, and the Kremlin wasn't impressed by this at all, were they?
No, and I think it's one of those situations where you get older white men who seem to have a fairly fragile ego if you hit them in the right spots. And for whatever reason, normally that would have been something that the Russians would have brushed off. But for whatever reason, in this particular case, they made the point that Russia is associated with the bear and there's no such thing as a paper bear. And they didn't like that insinuation that maybe they don't have the teeth that they once thought, Donald Trump thought at least, that they had. But it was interesting to see that their reaction to that, when in the past they wouldn't have been bothered by some of Donald Trump's comments.
But what I also find interesting is Michael, Isabel and myself, we're all having this conversation, but the reality is we're 3.5 years into this war and we still don't seem closer to a resolution at all. And I don't know what you think, Isabel, but we saw Donald Trump in Alaska with Vladimir Putin, and the negotiations on a possible ceasefire have stalled. Yes, lots of words at the UN, but nothing concrete yet, and people are still losing their lives on the front line.
Yes,
and in this
we
war.
saw President Trump rolling out the red carpet for a man accused of, war crimes and wanted by the International Criminal Court, and he perhaps naively believed that his special relationship with Putin would bring an end to the war, and certainly that ties in with his ambitions for a Nobel Peace Prize. But Putin's not having any of it, as has been made perfectly clear. And I think, Trump's increasingly frustrated, feels let down by Putin, and is therefore giving his support more to Ukraine, and even suggesting that much of their territory could be recovered with American support, which again is a huge change in tack. And it isn't just Trump, we should point out. Reports this evening that Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio have spent an hour in side meetings at the United Nations General Assembly this evening discussing what's been talked about over the last couple of days. And, there is reason for hope. Talking is always good, but, I'm afraid I remain very cynical that this is going to come to an end swiftly.
And I don't know what you think, Michael, but has the penny dropped for Donald Trump when it comes to Vladimir Putin? Europe have been saying this for a really long time.
I think this is one of the issues that you face when you don't have a strategy. And I've said this before. Donald Trump has talked about how he negotiates with his gut, how he wants to. He had said before the summit in Alaska, he wanted to look into Vladimir Putin's eyes, and within a few minutes he would know if he would have a deal or not. And when you don't have a concrete strategy that's clearly laid out, you run into a situation where people will recognize that there are opportunities to maybe get you to come over to their side. And if this was any other president, I think we would be talking about how U.S. foreign policy has done a complete U-turn in 24 hours. And with Donald Trump, it just seems as though it's another day.
And he just kind of came out yesterday with that Truth Social post that nobody was expecting. I think it overshadowed his speech at the UN General Assembly, which a lot of people were probably relieved about. But Isabel, if we just touch on one other thing I thought was quite interesting, is Donald Trump really attacked the Russian economy and almost said economically the Kremlin has now been pushed into a situation that it can't get out of because it's been on a war footing for 3.5 years. And I wonder if this now signifies that maybe sanctions on India and the moves that Donald Trump has made is now actually starting to affect Russia more than we thought.
Russia's financial situation is hugely fragile. Of course it is. I mean, they have been running this war machine now, as you say, for years. And whether or not Putin thought it would be much quicker, I think he really did. But it will just push him towards China. You know, if he feels that he's running out of cash, that the sanctions are too much of a stranglehold, that Europe's not buying enough of their oil, because let's not forget, Trump also said that yesterday, that we're funding our own war by buying Russian oil. You know, then we are pushing them in the other direction. And, you know, that's something that we also should be concerned about.
I don't know what your thoughts are, because yes, the European countries are buying energy from Russia, and Donald Trump did speak about that. But then the US is also buying $3 billion plus a year in energy products from Russia too. So it's a very difficult situation for all countries to be in.
Yeah, but there are different ways, I think, that you could hit the Russian economy or Russians or Vladimir Putin, other than just the way that Donald Trump talks about, you know, the buying of the oil by China and India and whoever else. You know, we've discussed this before. There are, I think it's $700 billion in assets, Russian assets, in G7 countries. And why not hold on to those, give those to the Ukrainians? You know, thinking outside the box is something that Donald Trump does very well. And maybe in this particular case, instead of saying another couple of weeks or another month, why not make a bit of a radical decision? Radical for others, maybe not so radical for Donald Trump, and say to Vladimir Putin, but he has to hold to it, you've got 48 hours, this is what we're going to do. And that's where I think he could affect change much faster, certainly on a timeline that Donald Trump might be happy with, and certainly the Ukrainians would be. But he doesn't seem comfortable. When he's at the podium, it's as though it's him against the world. But one-on-one, he doesn't seem as though he is comfortable taking those hard stands where maybe he's going to have to be aggressive with the person he's sitting across from.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Isabel and Michael. Let's move on to the fallout from Trump's speech in New York yesterday. And Isabel, let's talk a little bit about Escalator Gate, because really it has been so widely spoken about today. And many people are blaming the UN for potentially sabotaging Donald Trump, but the UN are actually blaming Donald Trump's team.
Things are really escalating. Do you know what? I was reading all about how disgruntled the United Nations are with the Trump administration yesterday morning, not least because they've been withholding funds since he came to office in January. There's all sorts of issues about how when the money does finally come in, it's actually ring-fenced and has to be spent within a certain period of time. And that time is passed up already, so they can't get their hands on the cash. It's a sort of loophole that Trump is exploiting. And the United Nations are incredibly frustrated. He has repeatedly and persistently undermined the work of the United Nations. We know that he isn't particularly interested in human rights. He's America first. He's got his own agenda. And so a lot of people there really strongly actually hate President Trump. And there was talk that there might be something like this take place. I even read the exact scenario yesterday morning, that there was talk that they might say, well, because there have been so many cuts, we can't afford the electricity, we'll turn off the escalator. And sure enough, we saw the First Lady and President Trump taking a step onto the escalator yesterday, and it went completely still, whilst the others were still moving. Now, the Secret Service, we were told today, were brought in to investigate this, and his teleprompter was also affected, and he said in his speech that whoever was responsible for that was going to be in big, big trouble. But it turns out, according to the UN spokesperson anyway, that it was actually a member of President Trump's own team who pressed the button to stop, the sort of stopping mechanism, if you like, at the top of the escalator. And so there's lots of finger pointing about whose fault it is. I think possibly the White House would like to accept that version of events to save face. But I think it's highly suspicious that I had read this exact scenario and then it was fulfilled. So, you know, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. There are a lot of disgruntled people there trying to just, in a sort of petty way, show them what they think of him.
I must say one thing about that, when I look at the footage, is Melania, it stopped and she carried on going. She had her heels on. She was not going to be any part of the drama. And I was like, That woman is absolutely incredible. She's got a great work ethic, actually. She's always behind Donald Trump in many senses. She's a strong character.
She absolutely is. If you look at her history, how she's ended up in the White House, she has a mind of her own. She might not speak out as much as people might like or as much as other first ladies have, but you can tell that she has a strong character. And in a situation like that, I'm not going to stand around here. We have to go to the top. I'm walking myself.
Yeah, absolutely formidable. But I also want to talk a little bit about Michael. So Donald Trump yesterday, in his UN speech, it was almost incredible that he mentioned the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in a big global speech. And now Sadiq Khan has hit back at Donald Trump. You know, what's been going on between these two?
So I think it goes back to when Donald Trump came to London about a decade ago, where Sadiq Khan was the mayor at the time, and he allowed for an inflatable of Donald Trump depicted as a baby to be flown while Donald Trump was in town. He took great offense to that, as somebody with an ego might. And as a result of the speech yesterday by Donald Trump at the UN, Sadiq Khan came out and he said that, Donald Trump, he called him a racist, a sexist, a misogynist, and Islamophobic. And it's interesting when you have a political leader who does not have to pay fealty to the President of the United States. It seems as though that person can get away with speaking his or her mind. And that's exactly what Sadiq Khan said. In fact, he went one step further and he said that I seem to be living rent-free in Donald Trump's head.
And Isabel, you were in London yesterday, and obviously Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. What happened? What was the feeling on the ground, as they say?
Well, there was laughter. I was actually with the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and the former leader of Ireland, Prime Minister there, the Taoiseach, Leigh-Ann Gerrans, and both of them were talking about it. And, they were actually just laughing, saying at this point, it was sort of incredulity. And so insulting, really, to come over on his second state visit and, take advantage of all of our hospitality and then to defame the city's, the country's capital in that way. I mean, total nonsense that the capital living under Sharia law, and really unnecessary. Exactly, this was an opportunity for President Trump to try and bring peace, if that's what he's so interested in, and instead it was sort of childish, mudslinging.
But it is interesting because the beef between the two men has been going on for so long. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And Typhoon Ragasa has ripped through Hong Kong after leaving a trail of destruction in Taiwan and also the Philippines. The deadly storm is now hurtling towards southern China, as Camille Nedelec reports.
Scenic Hualien County left in a mess, with grey sludge blanketing much of the landscape after Ragasa tore through Taiwan. Many people remain missing following the deluge. In Guangfu Township, some took cover at an elementary school.
So we spent the entire night on the second floor waiting for the rescue team. Early in the morning, the rescue team arrived and took away the elderly and the children first, while we stayed behind. The reason we came here around noon is because, while we were still at home, we received another notice saying there had been another round of overflow. So we came here with the rescue team by car.
The typhoon made its way towards Hong Kong next. Hurricane-force winds whipped up waves that pounded coastlines and flooded the streets. Typically busy promenades were emptied out as people took cover, while trees swayed violently. Many of them were ripped down.
Rescue teams across the Hong Kong territory have been deployed to clear away debris and uprooted trees like the one behind me. And that's because the race is on to get Hong Kong up and running again. In a major financial hub such as this one, time is money.
The storm's expected to make landfall in southern China overnight. Reports say nearly 1.9 million people were relocated across Guangdong province. Schools, factories and transport services were also suspended in about a dozen cities. Super Typhoon Mangkhut, which struck in 2018, is estimated to have cost Hong Kong close to $600 million in economic losses. It's too early to say what the total toll of Ragasa might take, but weather experts say global warming may be responsible for more frequent typhoons in Asia.
Because of global warming, you will have more moisture in the atmosphere, and water temperature is also high, and therefore you would expect to have once the storm develops, it has more energy. And so you can expect the storm to become even more intense in the future.
Meaning more destruction and devastation, unless there's a solution to the problem. Camille Nedelec, Arabiya English, Hong Kong.
Now, the Duchess of York's spokesperson has claimed she was trying to protect her daughters when she sent an email apologising to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Michael, what is the latest on the story? Because it's been rumbling for the last couple of days, really.
So the latest is that the Duchess of York has been dropped by 7 charities. Okay. That's the news line. Now, beyond that, we have a spokesperson, James Henderson, who has come out trying to give a little bit more of the backstory as to why the Duchess would have reacted the way that she did and why she said what she said. Of course, to me, it kind of feels as though there's a little bit of events have unfolded. You bring in the experts to talk about how you can present those facts to the public so that everybody seems to be believing what's been happening. And that's, I think, where we are now. The spokesperson has come out and he has said that the Duchess has been acting the way that she acted all those years ago was to protect her children and to protect her family, the 2 most important things to her. And that all, I think, is believable, but it doesn't really address the reasons why a certain emails or comments would have been said by the Duchess towards someone who was convicted of trafficking.
And I think, Isabel, if I'm correct, one of the big scandals is the Duchess of York actually publicly said she was no longer going to have anything with Jeffrey Epstein. And now an email has been leaked from 2011, 2 years after she made that statement, calling Jeffrey Epstein a supreme friend. And this is what's causing all the controversy. What's gone wrong? Does she just have bad judgment? Was she looking for money? What do we know?
Well, it's impossible to know what was going on in her head when she sent that email, but we know she does have a history of, where it comes to financial decisions, getting herself into hot water. Let's not forget she was involved in a cash for access scandal, for example. You know, the author Andrew Lowney's recently brought out a book called Entitled, and he described her as getting into a loop of debt, excessive spending, and then risky attempts to try and raise that money. Now, she was lent £15,000 by Epstein. Clearly, he was a bit of a cash cow to her. And then she'd said publicly that she abhorred paedophilia, and she, you know, renounced him, and then was, you know, fawning in private. So she has been dropped by 7 charities that she was patron of, including the Teenage Cancer Trust that she had been working with for 35 years, even through some of her lowest points, you know, toe-sucking incidents, all the incidents with her ex-husband as well. She still had these patronages. And, you know, she has established herself as a children's author, and I think that that is difficult territory, given that we're talking about, you know, sex offences here that relate to minors. Certainly here in the UK, it will be very difficult, I think, for her reputation to recover from this. Having said that, you know, she has been gaffe prone in the past, and she has bounced back because she has this very bubbly personality. She's very likeable. She has this sense of fun. And since King Charles has come to the throne, there was certainly a thawing of relations there. She'd had her first Christmas at Sandhurst, for example. Sandringham, not at Sandhurst, that's the Officer Training Centre. Sandringham, of course, where the royals all gather for their Christmas festivities, and she had been banned by the Queen for decades. King Charles had invited her back in, and it did seem as though she was back on the path to royal redemption. I think that now she and her ex-husband, who still live together at the Royal Lodge with its multiple bedrooms, 48 or something like that, but they're just going to sort of be more and more isolated, and it's just an embarrassment really for the King and for Prince William. I mean, look at how he was sort of squirming last week outside the funeral of the Duchess of Kent when Prince Andrew was trying to make small talk in front of the cameras. I mean, they are fairly shameless, these two, and they do seem to not really get it, and they do seem to get themselves into these awkward situations. So yeah, I think she's likeable, but I think this might be a terminal misstep for her.
And, you know, it's quite interesting because we saw Lord Mandelson recently lose his job as the US ambassador for the UK over the Epstein scandal, over the birthday book that's been brought out. And we're getting more and more information, aren't we, Michael, just leaking slowly into the press. And I wonder right now if people can actually recover from the Epstein stain, because it has just sort of touched so many different parts of society. We're talking about Lord Mandelson, that's politics. We're talking about Prince Andrew and Fergie, that's the royals. I don't know where the end to this is.
I don't think many people know where the end of this is. And this is the scary thing with a scandal, is that it has so many tentacles and it will just reach out. It is interesting that, you know, the files are, according to the megabase, somewhere within the government's archives, and they need to be released. And yet it's the Brits who have suffered the most as a result so far. And the Democrats have an opportunity in the coming months to really press for the release of more and more of whatever may still remain of the Epstein files. I do believe that, you know, there are so many scandals that individuals around the world can recover from. And I think if you look at what happened in the 80s and the 90s with people coming more aware about their sexuality and about drug use, and people would recover and their reputation would be rehabilitated and they would be able to make a comeback. But being accused of pedophilia is one that nobody can recover from. And so as these Epstein files maybe slowly, or at least bits and pieces, are leaking, I think that this is just a few, and I think there will be several more over the coming months and maybe even years.
And Isabel, you know, we talk there that 7 charities have dropped Fergie now in light of this new email that's been leaked to the Mail on Sunday. But what does this mean for the charities? Because we know if they have a royal patron, it brings in funding, it brings in people who want to come to the charity. It actually supports those. So on the other side of this, it's a big loss for the charities itself.
Yes, I mean, she wasn't a member of sort of the working royal family, if you like. You know, she's long divorced from Prince Andrew and hasn't got a title, but she is still working to her credit and has been all this time with several charities. And, you know, in the way I described before, she has a very warm, gregarious, likeable way about her. And, you know, she will have been a huge asset to these organisations, and they will be sad to part ways with her. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, whether they'll be able to find anyone from within the royal family, her daughters, for example, I don't know. But, you know, the whole thing is really unfortunate. And not least, I suppose, the victims of the Epstein families. They're urging charities in America that are linked to her to break association as well. But it's sad for those charities and all the people that benefit from them if it actually impacts their ability to fundraise. You know, she was a great asset for them, and the whole thing's, you know, just a tragedy, really.
And like Isabel did say there, we can't forget the victims when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, we talk about the big figures losing their jobs, but there's a lot more to the story and to the victims, and a lot of them came out in court.
And they have stood, at the steps of Congress in the U.S., where they have stood behind their lawyer, who's represented so many of them. And I wonder if, because they're not getting the reaction and the action from politicians that they want, I wonder, and they can't publicly stand up and say, I was on an island with so-and-so, but they can leak it to the press. And I think that the British press has a little bit of a different take on the way that they practice journalism than the U.S. And I think that that might be this might be an indication that as emails are quote unquote leaked, maybe more and more information is leaked over the coming months.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating story. But Isabel, also at the heart of this is a family. If, in many respects, the royals have lost Harry and Meghan. They've been caught up in more than one scandal. Do you think the royal family is still much loved despite these stories that have been coming out?
Yeah, I honestly don't think people in Britain necessarily associate Fergie as being in the sort of heart of the royal family anymore. There is huge affection still for the King, for the Queen, for Prince William, and for Princess Kate. And that hasn't changed, and this sort of thing simply makes us feel probably a little bit sorry for them, and how on earth are they going to, how to solve a problem like Prince Andrew and Fergie, frankly. It is a huge problem for them. And I don't know what the answer is. I think I've heard reports today that Fergie is absolutely devastated. I think it's very embarrassing for their daughters. It's not just one parent, but both parents that are creating headlines for all the wrong reasons. And it probably undermines their claim to the throne in a way. They are sort of in line, but I don't know where, about 15th or 16th or something like that. But it makes them look weaker. Just as a nuclear family, it must be very embarrassing for them.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Michael and Isabel, for your thoughts on that. Now, it's that time of the show where Michael and Isabel share their stories of the day. And Michael, yours is a pretty impressive nun celebrating her 105th birthday. Wow.
She has a habit of playing golf on a weekly basis, and that was my pun for the story. So she has been doing this since the 60s, when she was first introduced to golf by some friends. She goes out on the course on a regular basis, a weekly basis, in fact. On Fridays is what the story indicates. And she has been doing that even though she's legally blind. This is something that she likes the competitive aspect to it, where she gets to learn a little bit more about herself, she says. And she also finds that walking around, well, not walking around so much anymore, she usually drives in the cart, but she finds being on the golf course very meditative. And it's something that she credits for one of the reasons why she's been able to feel as youthful as she does.
I don't find it meditative.
Nor do I.
I find it extremely frustrating.
I agree with that.
It takes you 3 shots to get in the green and 9 shots to get into the hole.
And what's most frustrating about the whole thing, and I play other sports, is that the ball is just sitting there.
I know.
Where the other sports I play, the ball or the puck is moving, but it's just there, and it's you and your mind.
Yes.
And so the meditative aspect, I understand if you're in the zone. When Tiger Woods, when he was doing the Tiger Slam, fine, I get that, definitely. But for a 105-year-old nun who lives in Cleveland, who's legally blind, to find the meditative aspects to it, impressive.
We've got to love her. Isabel, at 105 years old, what would you like to be doing on your birthday? Have you ever thought about it? And what do you think of the nun?
I'll be eating a lot of cake, to be perfectly honest. I would be celebrating with cake and maybe just spraying champagne around. I don't know. I'm not going to see 105, I'm sure of it. And probably because the story I've chosen tonight is about burgers, which is much more up my street, possibly. And, not many people that eat lots of burgers make it to that ripe old age. Do you want me to tell you about it?
Yeah, I was going to say, tell us about the burgers. Go ahead.
So there is a steak award that compiles a list of the best burgers in the world, and in the top 10, the majority are, I'm proud to say, here in London. Now, I actually was quite surprised by that because I sort of associate burgers with the United States. I think probably they invented them. But the number one actually is in Valencia in Spain, which again, you might not expect. It's called the 100 Burger, and it's used with Spanish meat and lots of lovely herbs and all the rest of it. The second is a Plea in London, and these burgers, I mean, I don't know if you guys are burger eaters, but the price tags that some of them are charging. Hawksmoor's doing what they call a Big Mat, which is a play on a McDonald's, which comes in at £19.50. Would you pay that much for a burger?
I don't think I would. £19.50, only because I'm not really a burger person, but I don't think that's extortionate at somewhere like Hawksmoor, which, correct me if I'm wrong, it's super fancy, isn't it? It's got really good meats. So I get that. I don't know, Michael, you're from Canada. What's Canada's take on the burger? Is it really popular? Did America invent them? I don't know. Do you know anything about burgers?
So I know burgers in Canada are hugely popular. I haven't eaten meat since the 80s, so I'm not the best person to comment on burgers. But I do know that it was the toughest meal for myself to give up when I made that decision to stop eating meat. And what I loved the most, as my hands sort of form how they would form if I was holding a burger, was the idea of eating a burger rather than the actual taste. For me, growing up as somebody who would barbecue an awful lot with my family, burgers were a time when you came together for a picnic and an outdoor barbecue as well, and it was an idyllic sort of more innocent time.
I don't know about you. I know that's quite amazing, but Isabel, I don't know about you. Normally, I've had a long night, and that's when I might go to get a burger. Not quite as idyllic as Michael's.
Yeah, I think I associate a burger as a sort of guilty treat rather than either something that you save up for or as a sort of wholesome family thing. But I think that's a lovely vision. And actually, in this context of a barbecue, actually, I would love to eat a burger. But to me, it's not something I'd go to a restaurant for. And I certainly wouldn't be ranking my favourite burgers all the time. But maybe it's a male thing. Certainly my son, my father and my husband all love a burger. Whereas I wouldn't be bothered if I didn't eat a burger until I made it to 105.
I would agree with Isabel on that. I'm not bothered about it, but I do know the men, they love them. But thank you so much to our guest today, Managing Director of This Is Dubai, Michael Jabri-Pickett, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joined us from Surrey. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. GNT is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.